The story of North America's Rocky Mountains is full of transformations. The rocks at the peaks were once the bottoms of seas. The jagged landscape was once as flat as the prairie. The stunning views were once covered in ice. There's no such thing as a simple story of how the Rockies were made. Why are they folded like this? What kind of force was strong enough to bend solid rock? Why is there oil and gold trapped in the U.S. Rockies and not in Canada? And the glaciers. How much longer before they melt away? The Rockies are part of the story of shifts and collisions and the vigor of the Earth. Geologists are studying how these mountains began, and they are trying to determine how they will end. A geologic journey into the life of the Rockies. It's difficult to think of the Rockies without thinking of their sheer size. Their rawness. The romance in their vistas and the wind between their peaks. But this is a story of power, about the incredible muscle of the Earth. And how it bent this old rock like putty, then mashed it into mountains. The Rockies run from northern Canada down through the southern United States, a 3,000-mile chain of nature's own monuments to herself. But the Rockies are far from being permanent fixtures. In fact, in the 4-billion-year-old history of the Earth, the Rockies are but a fraction of a chapter. They started rising 180 million years ago, the byproducts of tectonic plates jostling and grinding for position. The Earth's surface sits upon great moving sheets of rock, powered by an underlying core of constantly circulating white-hot magma. Over the life of the Earth, these plates have wandered the globe many times. They've lumbered and crashed into each other, ripped land masses apart, and opened and closed oceans. When they collide, the force causes continental shifts that reverberate through the crust, strong enough to take a flat prairie and force it into towering mountains. As the Rockies arose, the pressure on the rocks bent them like pipe cleaners. It shattered them like crystal. Old rocks grated against new. They were pushed and tipped and stacked, one on top of the other. To fully understand where the Rockies came from, we need to start our journey on the west coast of North America, hundreds of miles from the Rockies' present location. Dr. Stephen Johnson of the University of Victoria is on the Heshquit coast of Vancouver Island to figure out how this jigsaw puzzle of island pieces fits together to create mountains.
So we have the Juan de Fuca oceanic plate, which is subducting beneath us right here, and it gives rise periodically to these huge earthquakes along the coast here every 500 years essentially. I just find rocks just fascinating. The stories they tell, the span of time, the tremendous forces. It's almost like the more you get to know them, they become your friends.
Stephen takes his students into the field to find signs of ancient collisions between the North American continent and anything that was anchored in its way.
You can see this sort of lens-like layers of this pebbly horizon coming along here, so it's quite continuous, and it would take a lot of energy to bring in this kind of thing. So either a big storm or potentially an earthquake.
This tableau is exotic rock that arrived on the back of a traveling plate. It came from somewhere else. Scientists believe early North America rode a plate west into the ocean. But then North America added to its mass by running down islands and small continents and melding them to its flank by sheer force. The evidence of the last of these coastal collisions reveals the early stages of the mountain building age. Stephen follows a trail down the beach towards a violent truth. The picturesque Pacific shore was once the scene of great turmoil, where islands were smashed to smithereens. Only a geologist's eye can spot the rock that doesn't belong.
We're standing in this great cathedral of rock, and all of the rocks here, which have been carved out by the wave action, this is a great thick sequence of basalt. So huge thicknesses of lava erupted at a volcano. And the interesting thing about these basalts, we call them the Carmoutzen, is that these were formed in an ocean island setting, exactly akin to Hawaii today. So this thick sequence of basalts, which gets upwards over 6 kilometers thick in places here on Vancouver Island, was formed way out in the ocean, the middle of an ocean, at an island just like Hawaii.
200 million years ago, shifting plates tore apart the supercontinent Pangaea. One of the breakaway shards became North America. The West Coast suddenly became the leading edge of a new continent riding a plate west, while at the same time, the plate underneath the Pacific continued to move east. That oceanic plate subducted under the continent. Subduction is when one plate is forced down below another, and the attached island chains were smashed into North America like bugs on a windshield.
These are the collisions that form mountains, so that when this huge thick sequence of basalts came into collision with the continent, you would have had huge earthquakes, you would have piled up the continent into great huge mountains.
The collisions sent shock waves through the Earth's crust, the first birth pangs of the Rocky Mountains. The repeated strikes against the continental margin forced the crust back, thickening it, buckling it. The eastern face of the Rockies falls like a curtain of stone that obscures the rest of North America from the Pacific. This is the Wilmore Wilderness in Alberta. It's remote in here. A package of mountain country set aside for hunters and anglers, and people who want to spend time in the Rockies away from crowds, golf courses, and resorts. The geology is stark here. The spectacular folds appear like textbook plates, striations on stone, tracing weathered lines of pressure and scraping and erosion. From here, one can clearly see the chapters of the mountain building story, from the foothills to the Front Range to the high peaks and back. But with a movement of a cloud and the slide of a stone, the clear picture of the Rockies can easily change.
They're always different. Every time you come back to even the same spot, it's always different. The mountains are in the process of dying. That's why they're there, right? They're being cut into by glaciers. They're being blown by the wind. They're being eroded by the constant rainfall. And so the water and the ice is constantly removing rock from the mountains. So they're disappearing slowly, maybe a millimeter a year off the top of the mountains, but they're on their way out.
George Kelly is a mountain man, raised as a trapper here deep in the Wilmore.
Horses are acting a little funny today. Sometimes it's the way the humidity is or something, electricity in the air. They act spookier some days than others.
He's a backcountry guide, the one big game hunters hire to lead them to their trophies.
Not really, no.
He runs his operation with his son Kip.
You know, sometimes
There isn't a person in this part of the Rockies who understands the place better than George. And now he's helping Stephen get ready to hunt rocks.
Yeah, I always liked the mountains when I was a kid, and I always like to go see what's on the other side of them. That's,
Yeah.
I spent a few nights sleeping on the mountainside because of that, you know.
Yeah.
Not planned? Not planned, you know. I didn't figure just go to the top and look over the other side to get over the other side, and gee, there's a lake down there. Let's go down to the lake, and you know, by the time burn all your energy going away from home and none to get back.
And what about further to the west, into the
Further to the west, if you want to see, you know, more changes, you'll have to go into, I guess it'd be the Persimmon Range.
Right, which I think is this one right here.
West here.
Yeah.
George is in his 60s. His domain is the Wilmore, but his mobility around the mountainsides is curbed now. George is sick, cancer. Long rides are no longer possible, but that hasn't taken away the solace he feels here. In the solitude, there's much time for perspective. Ponder a while on those folds, a gallery of twisted faces along the ranges of the Wilmore.
How is it those rocks are bent and not fractured all up? Like you couldn't bend them now. Were they different then, or were they?
Yeah, it's an incredible thing, right? To see, take limestones, which obviously, if we tried to
break. Yeah, it's just like a layers of hot pancakes or something bent there, and then
Yeah,
you know, and
yeah, no.
it's unreal how they.
When the first geologists came through the Rockies, they too traveled on horseback. Trying to answer the same geologic mysteries George is asking about.
Geology used to be, a long time ago, very much what physicists would refer to as stamp collecting. It was very observational, just seeing what's there, recording what's there, and not worrying too much about the physical principles that underlay those observations. And I think the way geology has totally changed, it has become very much a fundamental science where we're applying laboratory techniques, computer modeling to understand the processes. But beyond that, you can never get rid of the field work.
what Stephen wanted to see, the folded limestone mountains, the receiving end of those massive collisions on the Pacific coast. These mountains are made of hardened sediment deposited in the waters of a shallow sea 350 million years ago.
It's those thick limestones that buckle and fault that give us the spectacular Rockies. You can see the layers here are buckled right around in a fold. So this happens during the mountain building. So during the continental collision, what happens is you squish everything and you get buckles on all different scales, right from these tiny folds here right up to these huge scale folds up there. And you can see that they're almost identical shapes, so they were produced in the exact same fashion by the same forces.
Mountains really, they've been here a long time. You can guarantee them for quite a while longer, too. As long as people don't crush them all up and bulldoze them around, I guess they'll be here.
It's great to get there while it's still just like that, right? I mean, the mountains are coming down, right? Millimeter by millimeter, they're going, but it's just perfect right now. Yeah.
I think you had lots of time to get there.
We won't be here to witness the end of the Rockies, but in the brain of a geologist, it's in the foreseeable future. But the story of the Rockies is never completely clear, and the details get complicated in the fine print of science. One theory of mountain building does not fit all, and as the Rockies stretch south from Canada to the United States, the story changes. Those Rockies had volcanic eruptions and went up higher, and they are peppered with the refuse of miners who built boomtown after boomtown, trying to strike it rich. The story takes an unusual turn in the Southern Rockies, and Stephen is heading there next. There's a healthy rivalry between Canadians and Americans over whose Rockies are better. They share the same tectonic origins, but in the U.S., the mountains look different. There's oil here and precious minerals. They aren't found in the Canadian Rockies. Volcanics had a lot to do with making the U.S. Rockies. Magma hurtled towards the surface, heating water into high-powered jets that shot through the weakened cracks in the earth, infusing them here and there with minerals before exploding through the crust. In the U.S., the eastern face of the Rockies shoots up like a wall out of the prairie. There are no foothills like there are in Canada, just an abrupt verticality that you can see in these rocks they call flatirons in Boulder, Colorado. The flatirons make this area a mecca for geologists and mountain climbers, and University of Colorado professor Alan Lester.
The flatirons here are so spectacular and so good for rock climbing on because they have a kind of cementation that's holding the grains together that's totally different than the flatiron rock, the fountain formation that exists to the north and to the south of Boulder.
They have 14ers here, peaks rising over 14,000 feet. In Canada, the highest ones barely scrape 13,000 feet. The theory is that there is more of an uplift here, that the mountains are thrust higher up out of the ground. Recall what happened when the oceanic plate met the continental plate. The oceanic plate got shoved underneath. But under the U.S., many scientists believe the plate traveled at a more shallow angle than it did under Canada, a long-term decline through the continental crust. Then it punctured the Earth's mantle and released magma right underneath where the Rockies sit today. The magma shot up out of the ground and formed cliff faces like these ones, basalt, same as the volcanic cave Stephen found on Vancouver Island. The U.S. Rockies are lined with volcanic rocks. They're the basis for the Colorado mineral belt: gold, silver, copper, and molybdenum.
Mined up, mined up, mined up, and this canyon we're coming up here is called Wall Street.
Oh, yeah?
Because it was a location where lots of mining was being done.
So this little hill here then is a...
This is a stock. This is part of the mineral belt.
So an intrusion?
68 million year old intrusion, which is a piece of the mineral belt stock that has, or mineral belt magma that has sort of bubbled up through the old Precambrian, you know, crustal rock.
Right.
And the magmas are a heat source. They're a heat source that drives hydrothermal fluids, high temperature waters, around in the nearby rocks, and it's those waters driven through fractures in the rock that precipitate out gold, silver, molybdenum, lead, all of the desirable ore deposits.
Right.
So the mineral belt is really there because of that.
The mineral belt lured waves of fortune seekers into the Colorado Rockies. Boomtowns sprang up, then died away when the ore played out. Nevadaville isn't that far into the mountains from Denver or the interstate highway, but it might as well be at the North Pole. It's a classic ghost town, haunted by old dreams, littered with cogs and tracks. The cruddy rock strewn about came from the bottom of the pits. The Rockies here were turned inside out by frenzied miners over a century ago.
You know, the old miners weren't going out looking for mineral belt magmas or plutons of a particular composition. I think what they were doing was just simply looking for discolored rock, the orange and yellow kinds of altered rock that we've seen and we've been looking at over here. Even a few ounces per ton would still be economic. But they were finding this, they brought it in, they assayed the gungy-looking yellowish rock, and that said, okay, let's try it here.
There was stuff on the surface, though, that they would have been able to pick up on.
Yeah, there had to have been stuff on the surface to give them the tip-off that this was the place to go digging. And they're looking for veins, they're looking for some kind of structural feature that would potentially be a pathway for the fluid. If it's discolored properly, then they'll go and dig that out. Almost all of the mining was tunnels, digging into the high-grade veins that they found.
And how high are we?
We're about 9,000 feet here, and this was a cold place in the winter. It was hot in the summer. The air is limited. Then you go down in the mine shaft where the air is even harder to get to. And all these people down there breathing and dust flying everywhere. It was a hard place to work. There were mine collapses. You know, nowadays mining still is taking place on the mineral belt, but it's in very localized places, and the operations are enormous open pit mines, which, you know, effectively are safer and they're more efficient as a means to take out gold.
There used to be men under the ground here at Cripple Creek, but now they just dismantle an entire mountain to get at the gold. It would take a few 100 million years for nature to remove a rocky mountain. Work crews can do it in less than a decade.
take this and let's pass it through the lower and the upper loop there. Pull this.
So how long have you been climbing? All your life?
Gosh, it feels like it. I'll go up first, and then bring you up.
Professor Alan Lester is a very accomplished rock climber. Professor Stephen Johnston, however, is not. But Alan is determined to get Stephen to see this different perspective on the rock, gripping it, depending upon it, rather than just feeling it and smashing away samples.
But the nature of this rock, with all the bedding surfaces and these solution holes that I can stick my fingers into, I mean, it's so fun to climb on. It's like it's made for climbing. Oh, nice job. You're in the shale layers now that have been eroded out. Mm-hmm. I'm coming into a really red layer here that has just a little more of the oxidized iron in it. Okay, here we go. It's an adventure to move up through here.
Great way to get
I think the stuff we do trying to tease out the history of these mountains is an adventure also. It's an adventure that takes place in the mind. Okay. One that we put together by collecting information, our geologic data, scientific analysis, and the adventure is without a time machine to go back and read something. Oop, I'm clipping one of the bolts. And read something about the history of these mountains. And these rocks, it's the history before even the dinosaurs, during the late Paleozoic 300 million years ago. Whew. Okay, just about up. I'll get onto the other side of the Flatiron in just 1 minute.
Right.
Where I'm on the other side of the bedding surface. And I can put my weight on my feet. Whew. Yeah, how does that feel?
Somewhere between terrifying and exhilarating.
Thrusts and folds, magmas and minerals. As geologists work and probe the Rockies, more and more comes out about how they went up. It's pretty clear, though, what happened to the mountains when they did arise. They were etched, carved, bulldozed by glaciers. But the best place to see glaciers isn't here. It's back north, in Canada. And that's where Stephen is going next, if he ever gets down off this rock. "20,000 years ago, this is what a good chunk of North America would have looked like. One massive sheet of ice covering the prairies, the mountains, everything. By their nature, glaciers move. The masses of ice were so heavy and powerful that they pulverized solid rock and carved the mountains into the spectacular shapes we see today. But like everything else, the glaciers aren't immune to change. And they are disappearing now. Meltwater is pouring off and flowing down rivers to the lakes and reservoirs below. The Columbia ice field is the largest accumulation of ice south of the Arctic Circle. It's also the hydrographic apex of North America, which means meltwaters flow into the water systems that feed the rivers of British Columbia, the North, and the Canadian prairies. eventually spilling into 3 of the globe's oceans: the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic. If fresh water were gold, this would be the mother lode of North America. The problem is, it's not very healthy.
Oh yeah, you can see that strong reflector down through here. What do you think the total ice thickness is just here? About 50 meters. Got a depression. It's going down in there. Showing up. That's about the same thickness as what we can see.
Nick Isles, wearing the red coat, is a glaciologist from the University of Toronto. With his graduate student, Mike Lazoric, Nick is using ground-penetrating radar to do a diagnostic test on the thickness of the ice.
So what's happening? Have you got like something that's sending out a sound or something into the ice?
Well, it's radio waves. So we've got a transmitter and a receiver, and this unit's been set up so it can go in rough terrain, so we can haul it anywhere.
Right.
So that's a receiver right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Remember, you're trying to estimate the mass, the total mass of the ice up here.
Right.
See how much you lose and how much you gain. So this gives you critical thickness data.
Mm-hmm.
So what you try and do is measure the thickness of the last winter layer over the entire ice field.
Yeah.
And you can get a volume, and then you compare that to how much meltwater is being lost off of this big cap. And you compare the two, and most glaciers up here are negative.
Yeah.
They're losing mass.
Right.
So they're pretty unhealthy. But, you know, it's no question how long ice will be up here. Certainly there's good evidence that ice wasn't here 5,000 years ago.
Right.
It was warmer than it is now. So there are glaciers here that only reformed during what's called a neoglacial, about 4,000 years ago.
How much longer do we come up here and there's no ice?
Well, maybe 100 years. I mean, these are really thinning very quickly.
Is that right?
So glaciers come and go.
Yeah.
They're a yardstick, dipstick, if you like, to measure climate change. And then, of course, 20,000 years ago, this whole area, even the summits, many of the summits would have been covered by ice.
Right.
There is discussion about global warming and its effect on the glaciers, but it's hard to determine how much the glaciers would have melted anyway and how much we are hurrying them along. What isn't debatable is their fate. They will disappear, flushed away down the rivers they feed. Even the world-famous Athabasca Glacier is shrinking. It's a huge tourist attraction, but the grandchildren of those tourists will only know it as an ice patch, and after that, an alpine meadow. For now, the Athabasca is like a laboratory where the mountain-making process is at work. As Nick and Stephen stand on its surface, the glacier carries on carving the rock as it moves down the valley.
What is this called then when you have this stream draining right down inside the glacier?
This is a really important feature of the glacier. This is a moulin, which is a French word, as you know, for mill.
Right, okay, so it's spiraling down into the glacier.
And what it does, it transfers surface water. So there's a lot of melt going on the ice surface.
Yeah.
Transfers that water all the way down to the ice belt base, and then the glacier can slide on that thin film of water.
So does the water end up going right down through the ice and running along the bedrock underneath?
Yeah, and there'll be many other such moulins scattered around the ice surface. They're all, it's like the plumbing system. They're all connected in.
Yeah.
So these are called wet-based glaciers.
Wet glaciers.
Wet-based glaciers, yeah, that's the key feature of these ice masses.
Right.
And that enables the whole glacier to slide.
Glaciers are pulled by gravity and lubricated by meltwater. Rocks are embedded in the undersides of the glaciers, creating a sort of giant piece of sandpaper that scours the valley floor clean. They plow through and destabilize mountain flanks, causing landslides that are carried away.
And how deep down do we have to go till we get to the bedrock underneath here, do you think?
Here, maybe about 250 meters.
You think this thing goes down, straight down to the bedrock?
Would you like to find out?
Not really.
It wasn't that long ago, only 100 years, that the ice filled this valley right up to the tops of the ridges. The Athabasca is barely a shadow of its former self. And as we're about to see, as the glaciers disappear, so too are the Rockies. At the far end of the Athabasca Glacier, there are ice falls, a frozen sculpture garden that changes every year. Nick and Stephen are being led by an experienced ice walker. There can be dangerous crevasses on the surface of the glacier. Many people have wandered off up here and disappeared. The ice mimics the thrust and fold layers of the Rocky Mountains. A glaciologist can pick out lines in the ice that are almost identical to lines found in sedimentary rock.
There's a bedrock step underneath, and ice is coming over, and this is the brittle layer on the surface, so it's cracking.
So, right, so we see it coming down right up there. So it's 50 meters thick up there, beautifully layered like a normal sedimentary rock. And then it flows down in here, thickens, like what are we, 300 meters thick here? So as the ice moves over this fall, it's opening up these breaks, right?
Right, and they get filled in with snow.
So just like this right here, this is just filling in a crevasse right here.
And then as they move down, the crevasses will get squeezed. You'll see nice white bands running across the glacier.
So that's all these ridges then, are crevasses breaking up as you come down over the step, I guess, in the underlying bedrock.
And there's a tectonic analogy too, isn't there, with these steps? Just like faults in rock. You can measure the shortening, the widening very quickly. In a couple of weeks, you can get some nice information. Whereas those processes take millions of years in the real world, in rocks.
Just look at how much rock is exposed around us. You could have hundreds of geologists crawling over these rocks for hundreds of years, and you still would never be able to see everything, right? It's just, I mean, it's humbling, right? How much rock there is exposed, even just in this one face.
And it's only been exposed by glacier thinning. You know, geologists 100 years ago never saw this.
I can't wait for the glaciers to disappear.
Don't say that.
As they move, the glaciers act as a conveyor belt for huge boulders. The rocks would slip from their moorings and land on the surface of the glacier. From there, they'd ride out the life of the ice until the glacier melted and left them stranded. In southern Alberta, near the town of Okotoks, there is a big rock. In fact, Okotoks is a Blackfoot Indian word that means big rock. It was plopped on the prairie by a glacier huge and powerful enough to carry something this big from a mountain up near Jasper for hundreds of kilometers.
That's right. You can actually locate the exact spot from which this came, up on Mount Edith Cavell.
Is that right, eh?
It's about 350 kilometers to the north.
Yeah. So the glaciers are kind of removing the mountains. They're killing the mountains off, but they're taking that material and kind of giving new life to the continent, eh?
If you look back over the last 2 million years, these ice sheets have come and gone on a clockwork basis. And you can predict when the next one will come through. It's about 5,000 years' time.
From now?
Yeah. So ice will be here again. Big boulders will be moved around. The landscape will be eroded. The Rockies will be continued to be eroded. So we haven't finished. This isn't the end of the journey or the end of the story. We're really only halfway through it.
It's a cycle.
It's a cycle. And there's a tendency, even amongst geologists, to think that it's over. We've explained the story, but looking into the future, we can predict that there'll be several kilometers of ice over here.
Amazing,
Maybe
right?
5,000 years' time.
But,
so the theme is one of continuous change, environmental change through time.
all we are detectives trying to find out the pieces of the puzzle in the past and try and predict what will happen in the future.
Nineteenth century philosopher John Ruskin described mountain building as the violent muscular action of the Earth's body. Geology tells us that the seemingly stoic and permanent Rockies are actually restless and malleable, alive. An outfitter like George Kelly, who knows the local Berlin, Hoff, and Persimmon ranges personally, would see life in the geology of the Wilmore Wilderness because he couldn't look back on his own life without seeing the Rockies.
Well, now I get tired a lot easier than I used to too, but it's beats hell out of walking up the mountains anyway.
Yeah. The fatigue, is that with your illness?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. It's old age and illness, I guess. It's illness, it's not the old age.
You don't seem at all perturbed by it, you know? You seem really...
Well, I am a little perturbed about it, but I mean, there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
It's just you have to accept things the way they are.
George has an understanding of a natural order formed by his time in the mountains. He's also seen the vulnerability of the Rockies. He knows there would be development all through here if people like him and his son weren't in the Wilmore using it, protecting it. In that sense, the mountains and George need each other, and he'd rather spend his dying days here in the palliative care of the Wilmore than be anywhere else.
I'd probably scatter my ashes somewhere in the mountainside, I don't know, stuff me in a shotgun and blow them out the other end or something.
Geology can remind us that we live here at the pleasure of nature. The study of these mountains tells us a lot about our place in the world. Change always happens, and it's staggering to think that these mountains won't always be here. But then again, neither will we.